Yes.
Okay, welcome everybody to creating effective fundraising goals. I think many of the people who are on today's call have set goals many times in their life, personally, professionally, fundraising, or otherwise. And we're going to dive into some of the things that work and some of the things we're wrestling with in this particular goal setting environment. We are still in January 2021. We are in front of the pandemic. We're in the middle of it. Maybe it is wrapping up, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. So we want to start looking at what is there and how do we set goals in a really uncertain environment. I am Elizabeth Finlayson, the CEO and lead coach of the Nonprofit Coach. My mission is to create a fairer, more equitable, inclusive world filled with empathy and beauty. And my team and I do this by supporting our nonprofit clients through strategic planning, fundraising training, and support. Okay. So I mentioned at the top of this, like, how do we make financial goals when everything is up in the air? So I want to look at some of the things I saw happen in 2020 and what worked and didn't work. And so, as I mentioned, we're already in an uncertain environment. When we started last year, we were in an environment that looked more certain than it really turned out. But what I saw happen as the pandemic news and the academic news started to occur at the early part of last year is nonprofits assumed that fundraising was going to be bad. And once you make that assumption, then the behaviors will go with that. So things I saw happening were that nonprofits stopped fundraising. I saw nonprofits stop communicating, and I saw nonprofits lay off staff, and particularly fundraising staff, before they really had any financial information that went with that. Now, there are plenty of nonprofits that actually did experience some hardships and had to make tough choices. But we don't want to make tough choices when we really don't need to, because the nonprofits I saw that kept moving forward, kept communicating, and kept fundraising actually did well last year, and sometimes better than they did the year before. So let's look at other problems that happen when we set goals. One of the things I have seen perennially in nonprofits is just increasing all the goals every year. We just need more money, more of it everywhere. Everything is going to grow. And what I don't see is maybe it tied to strategy or growth or a reason why we believe a particular type of fundraising is going to grow in this year versus a year before. And sometimes when we go to set all our goals higher, no matter what, we're just going to be like super people. I really want to ask and say, can you look and say, did you not work hard last year or the year before? Like, was it just not good enough? Because that's what I feel like is really being said. And often in the nonprofit sector, it's not that we're not working hard. We're working really hard. So if that's not the problem, what is it that's going to get us from where we are now to completing a higher goal? It probably isn't just to like do more is likely not the answer. When we look at things being up in the air, we can look at it as a turbulent time. It's also an opportunity, and it's an opportunity to try new things. So I'm going to open this up to the group of people that are on this call so far and to say, who tried something new that worked last year, if anyone feels brave enough to share.
This is Heather, and I'm the executive director of Vero Heritage. We steward an historic building and operate a almost completely unrelated museum. So it's a little schizophrenic, but we, for the first time ever, did a couple online fundraisers that went really well for us. I mean, they were small, but they went well. They were not really events per se, but just I know I have to be careful about how I use the word raffle, but they were essentially online raffles that helped us bring in a little extra income. And we also took advantage of this strange situation and are now selling masks that are related to our museum.
Great. So you found the opportunities that were there for you. And then here's my follow-up question to you is, would you have tried those things had we not been in an up in the air, turbulent environment last year?
Not at all.
Right. And did you learn anything from those? Is there anything that you want to take into this year that worked?
What I take into it is actually having online events is a little bit more democratic. I mean, I realize it assumes that people still have access to online, they have internet connection, what have you, but it allowed, I think, a broader participation because nobody was bound by geography. Um, and in this particular instance, it was a way for people to contribute that felt like they didn't have lots of money to contribute. And so they might not have been able to pay a $75 event ticket fee, but they could buy a raffle ticket or perhaps, a package of 7 raffle tickets at a lower contribution. And then people didn't feel insignificant. They felt like it was an opportunity to participate at a few different financial levels.
Hmm. Okay, that's great. Yeah, I hear a lot of learnings in there, and like one is like maybe you broadened your reach. Certainly, you now have different giving levels for people to come in at. One of the things that I find when we're facing a crisis is it is a lot harder to justify just doing everything you did before. I speak a lot about like in my early days in my fundraising career, there were points where I was so busy that even when I was doing something I didn't think was particularly effective, I didn't have time to stop and think about how to do it differently because I knew we needed the $2,000 from the thing I was going to do that in my mind, I'm like, this is like a low ROI for everything we're putting into it, but I didn't know where that money was going to come otherwise. And it was just
Mm.
like, we just need to keep doing it. We just need to keep doing it. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's definitely, I think, an opportunity to look and say, we don't need to just keep doing what we did. Some things we want to keep doing, and some things we want to try new things this year, and some things we tried last year that are new. So
It's
basically, crises force us to look at the assumptions governing our behavior and and the habits that dictate our every move. Go ahead, Heather.
I was just also going to say, I know that we all suspect this, but it really reiterated to me how much time goes into planning live events. And is it, like you said, is there really a good ROI on that when there's massive amounts of both staff and volunteer time associated with live events as opposed to the other things we do? Yes, they did not offset the total income that we would have had from live events, but they also had minimal time commitments on staff part.
Right, right. So I feel like what you're discovering is something that fundraising consultants are constantly pushing nonprofits to, which is to wean off of events. We know we want the income, and events have a place. It's not that we get rid of events. It's simply that events are the most expensive way to raise money, just in pure cost. And then when you add staff time in that, they're very, very expensive. So we want to use them sparingly. So that's one of the ways we can look into this year and say, I want to have events that allow people to give, that allow people to participate. But if it's the only thing I'm relying upon, it's probably still not very reliable in this environment. And there's probably some cheaper ways to raise money. Great, great learning. Does anybody want to add ideas or things that they learned or tried last year before we move forward?
Sure, I'd be happy to just offer, we kind of along those lines usually did a in-person 5K run, 3K walk event, which raised good funds for us. Also their, our expenses. And so this year we did it virtually. And I think the best part was that we did a lot more peer-to-peer fundraising, having it be virtual and having that be a suggestion. And so we got a lot of new donors. We got a lot of, we exceeded our fundraising goal and we raised our net proceeds from the event were much higher because we didn't have the expenses. And yeah, I think it was the peer-to-peer fundraising that really took off with it being a virtual event. So that was great.
Awesome. Great learning. Great learning. So something for the rest of you to kind of write down, like maybe something to try this year. So we're going to start an exercise that we're going to finish later on in today's webinar. But what I want you to do is either pull out paper, pen, or pull up like a Word document on your computer, whatever it is. And since I didn't ask you to prepare any numbers or look at your old budgets, we're going to ballpark this. Okay, but I want you to think back to 2020 and think about the different fundraising activities that you did. And I want you to look and say, okay, did I try anything new? and how much did it raise? So I want you to write it down, anything that you did that was new, and what they raised. Just stop there for a second. Then I want you to ask yourself, will you be able to repeat this activity this year? So maybe something like selling masks, that might work for part of the year. And that might be something that it won't be necessary after a certain point. Or maybe you did a virtual event and maybe you're going to transition to a different kind of event. So there might be things that will be repeatable and things that will not. So I just want you to look, what new things did you do this last year? How much did they raise, and are you able to repeat them this year? Okay, so now I want you to look at 2019, or draw it up in your mind, or if you can pull it up in your computer in front of you, that's great. And I want you to look at what fundraising activities you did last year in 2020 that were really from 2019. Like, you always do this thing. And see, what did they raise this year, and write it down. So it might be you always do some type of appeal, or you always do some type of event. Maybe you changed it, or maybe you did something maybe differently, or maybe you always get certain grants. You got those grants or you didn't get those grants. So I want you to write down things you did last year and what they raised, ballpark, that were from previous years.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth. So for example, this year for us, there was a grant that I don't think would have even existed. It came from Florida Humanities, which ultimately came from CARES money. So are we also including things like that?
I would say that would go under new activities. So
Okay.
That was a new grant you got this last year. It may or may not be repeatable. So try and write down, if you think you could repeat it, get it again. Good question. Other questions like that? And then give me a thumbs up if you've completed the exercise. Okay, we got one thumbs up. All right, so we're going to move on, and you can keep filling this in while we're going, and we're going to come back to these towards the end of the webinar and revisit them. So we want to have those a little bit in front of us while we're making our choices. All right, so let's look at our next question we wanted to focus on today. What do we do about events this year? So this is, I think, one of those things that is most up in the air as we look at last year, the year before. So last year, we know that there are organizations who canceled their events. They did virtual events, or they did hybrid events, are the things that we've seen. In this year, we're not out of the woods yet. So some people who are looking towards the end of 2021 maybe feel safe with a physical or a hybrid event. But I think if we're looking at least in the first half of the year, a physical event, unless it's socially distant or outside, or you have some other mechanisms in place, is risky in your planning. So these are just some things to be thinking about. Organizations that succeeded last year tried new things. That's one of the things I saw is, maybe they switched the way they did their event. Maybe they stopped doing an event and they did something else. They transitioned it to virtual. There's all kinds of ways, but they tried new things. Those are the things that we saw last year that was successful. The other thing that I saw over and over again with my most successful event clients over last year was that they had help. So they created partnerships around them. So I saw that they were partnering with local television stations or the community college and using their studio, or a marketing firm that has access to cameras or things like that. So they also used talented event moderators who have access to software that we don't have. They made sure that they had somebody who could MC, and then people who were running all the background of their event. So maybe it looked like one person running an event, but really there was a team of people. So those are the things that I saw working last year. So people who tried new things, people who had help. The other thing that absolutely worked last year, and I think we are going to have to do this year as well, and I'm just going to tell you this because I noticed this is the thing that's making my executive directors most tired, is to have multiple backup plans. So feel free to plan your physical event or your virtual event or your hybrid event. But if you only have one plan, you're more likely to be caught in a difficult situation. So if you're like, I'm going to be really safe this year, I'm just going to do virtual events, and then your state opens everything up and everyone wants to be in person, do you feel like your virtual event is going to compete against that? Do you feel like you have the infrastructure in place to suddenly transition to a physical event, or vice versa? So this is the thing that is most challenging, but if you can actually take the discipline and the time, schedule out a portion of your day and create multiple plans, you're being kind to your future self. That's one thing I learned at a mom conference from an organizing consultant, was to be kind to your future self, right?
But
usually we're kind to our present self.
But that's also very difficult to come up with, possibly 2 or maybe even 3 plans is also very draining in the present, and is that much more work in the present. So like with another nonprofit that I worked for, especially, that's all we were, was a live event. And, we kept coming up with all these different plans. Okay, well, maybe this, maybe this, maybe this. And we kind of fleshed them out, and then none of them were viable. And it was just like everybody kind of threw in the towel at that point. They're like, oh my gosh, I've given so much creative energy to coming up with these alternatives. And even those, because things got so much worse than we would have ever expected, were just not viable.
Okay. So when you say that none of them were viable, essentially the backup plans didn't take into account what would happen if it was a full shutdown or things like that.
Right, because when we started the planning, which was in April, in April 2020, we never imagined that we would still be basically in my state, we're in the same spot. Numbers are still rising, vaccines are not inspiring that much hope right now, just because the distribution is difficult, not because people don't believe in them, but
you have to get one for it to work.
Shots in the arm, as they keep saying, shots in the arm.
Yes. So one of the things that I hear is missing, and this is where, having a professional who can help might have helped and might not have, right? Many of us were taken aback last year. Many of us did not know what's happening. I know there's people who you can find on the internet predicted pandemics decades ago. But many of us were taken aback.
Yeah, well, those people are epidemiologists.
Yes. I haven't even related to one. I was like, I should have just called her. But I think that one of the things you can do is some risk management. So when one is doing some really in-depth planning, and I know this takes more time and more discipline, and often in the nonprofit sector, we don't have the skills and support, say on our board or in our consulting base or whatever it is, who can help us with this, but you can really start to dive deep into predicting risk around each area of a project. And then you can look and say, well, if this is a risk, what is the backup plan and what does it cost? And if you go through that process, you can start to say, well, actually, the cost of overcoming this risk is worth it, so we're going to do this, or it's not worth it, and so we're not. But I think it sounds like there was a lot of planning done that maybe didn't take all the risks into account. And I'm sorry that they went through all that work. And I imagine that those plans have value for the future.
They definitely
provided
will.
the organization
There is
survives.
a notebook full of amazing ideas. I just think it was a little bit deflating for folks to have put so much creative energy into multiple options and none of them were able to take place.
Yeah. And I want to differentiate here too a little bit what I'm hearing, and this, I may be hearing this incorrectly, is the difference between ideas and planning. So there can be great ideas, but if we haven't looked at, is this feasible? Do we have the budget for it? Do we have the staff? Can it happen? Can this happen with everything shut down? Then it may be a great idea, but it's not quite the same thing as a plan. So that might be part of the difference, I wonder.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying. It's just that none of us non-epidemiologists would have ever, we would have never been able to predict our current situation. It was just not possible back then. And I think what happened, it was just very deflating. And I think people lost a lot of, they lost a lot of their drive or inspiration, I guess. And then just the daily rigors, mental rigors of, what the whole world is going through.
That's absolutely true. I would say too, when I'm thinking about the type of planning here is like, for instance, like scenario budget planning could be something where we look at what would this event be like with 100% capacity, 50% capacity, or 0% capacity, we're now online. Those maybe don't require all of the creativity and the same investment as like, what happens if we cut these numbers in these different ways? Is there a different income stream we could put in here? So maybe it might be the type of planning and the depth that went into it versus like, say, 3 columns on a spreadsheet.
Got it.
Something that we talked a lot about last year was setting the goalpost for best case and base case scenarios and like constantly reevaluating, but also coming up with, plan A, plan B, plan C, meeting that best case or base case. But I think something that was really helpful is the same person didn't own the responsibility or the strategy or the planning for each plan. So different people did, which allowed for different people to sort of learn what would need to be done. Like you're going to figure out Zoom for 200 people, if we get to plan B. You're going to figure out peer-to-peer and, make a selection on Just Giving if we decide to go with plan C.
I really like that idea a lot. Our issue is where I work, we have 1.5 staff people, and the nonprofit that I'm heavily involved with as a volunteer, that's all we are, is volunteers.
I have this radical idea for not, this is Kat talking, by the way, that for nonprofits, especially for right now, tapping their resources, meaning like creating a team, but doing it in a way that is like you really own a portion of something with like a time commitment and a list of responsibilities. So then the leaders in the organization can actually truly hand it off.
So like task force kinds of things, which I'm all for that. And I think people are way more willing to volunteer when they know, okay, I'm not making a multi-year commitment here. I think that people like that.
But yeah, 100%. And I feel like when you tie it to a timeline to say like, you will be in this position for 6 months, or you will manage this responsibility for 6 months, it's a lot easier for people to commit because they know it's not, going to bleed into, months beyond that, or, they don't know if there will be heavy months and light months. It sort of puts a really succinct schedule to it.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think we are more dependent upon our volunteer leaders than maybe we have been in the past, and some of them have great experience in the for-profit sector doing a lot of these same things. And so we may be able to just turn to people and say, this is your time. And it's also a great way to test people for future board membership as well. Like if you've got somebody who is willing to make that 3-month commitment and do some scenario planning, but to see how it goes before you decide together to join the board. So my last thing on events here is really just my advice is to plan the event with the largest income opportunity that has the least likelihood of being canceled. So if I'm going to put my eggs in a basket, I'm going to say, okay, I want something that is not going to be canceled, but isn't, like no dollars. So like finding that like sweet spot. So if you looked at those 3 plans and say, I'm going to plan as though I'm executing that particular version, but I have these other ones kind of in the background waiting to happen. All right. So I feel like this is a little too common. I've certainly worked in situations like this where your organization sets goals, but making them is another story. Does anyone want to share an experience around this? And you don't have to. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but just wondering if people have a story around this.
We did not meet our end of year goal, but I'm not allowing it to get me that down because it was a little bit arbitrary. We had never made a really good end of year push previously. So I didn't really have anything to compare it to, just kind of set something and was hoping for the best and got pretty close, but we did not make our goal.
Yeah, that happens. And, I think the fact that you were executing something completely new is really great. And that you were kind of close, like, so you were in the right ballpark. Then it's a matter of kind of like looking at where you're at, looking at where to go next. I have worked in a lot of organizations where, I mentioned at the beginning where it's like everything grows, everything has to grow, everything is a push. And what I found in those situations is that frequently nothing grew in those environments. Or I would see organizations where they were taking up and abandoning plans, so you never really had a chance to figure out if anything worked or stick with that strategy for a while. Those are places where I've seen making goals to be difficult. Another place where it can be challenging when goals are fundraising goals, particularly when they're set not based on fundraising, not based on activities, plans, or strategies, but based solely on need. So I understand like we might need something, and need is really important for propelling our nonprofit fundraising. We need to be able to communicate our needs. We need to get those messages out to people. But if we solely need something, if we're just like, oh, we need $100,000 for this program, and then we're like, great, put it in the fundraising budget. All of a sudden, we're in a situation where there isn't a reason why we're being asked to do that, or knowledge that we could do it, or strategy to make it happen. Obviously, then we can go and make a strategy, but it feels a little bit backwards. So I think always we want to be looking at needs, always we want to be looking at where we can grow. But if everything grows, or we're just handed really large goals out of nowhere and it's not really done in a consultative fashion, then I think we can end up with trouble when we get to the end of the year and we have to have completed those. We've got a comment here: the everything grow mindset reminds us of how local government works, but it is more about balance. Yeah, great comment there. So let's look at what does work when setting goals. This is taking me such a long time. It feels so simple, but really the secret weapon for succeeding at making goals is focus. I was like, okay, yeah, focus. What do you say that I don't have focus? No, I know that it sounds simple, but it really is a paradigm shift from that everything grows mechanism. So let's just look at what focus looks like in the nonprofit sector, because we can say focus, but what does that really mean? Well, one of the hardest things about focus, and particularly in the nonprofit sector, is it looks like saying no. So now, who do we have to say no to? My dad, who's actually upstairs watching my children right now, so I could do this webinar, he has a saying that he raised me on, which is that, no is the most powerful word in the English language. Those 2 letters, so important. What do we have to say no to? We have to say no to chasing down every opportunity. right? It doesn't mean we don't go after opportunities. It doesn't mean we don't grow, but we can't go after every single one, whether it's a programmatic opportunity. You know, sometimes, yeah, it works out. Sometimes there's a budget and a partner and everything, and that's great. But sometimes it needs to wait till next year. Sometimes it needs to wait to have the right partners. Sometimes it'd be great if you could do it, but maybe some other nonprofit could execute it in a better way. Maybe you could facilitate getting them together. But we don't, at the moment we're standing, you don't have an unlimited budget and an unlimited amount of time. So the other thing is, like, we have to say no to our fear that if we don't chase down every single dollar, no matter how ridiculous the amount of staff time, that someone else will get there first. One of the things we have to say no to sometimes are well-meaning board members with lots of great ideas for non-revenue generating activities. So maybe they think it'll be a revenue generating activity, and we can have a conversation with them. Sometimes it's worthwhile to say yes to that board member and know that it's not a great idea and execute it anyway. But sometimes we really just have to have a tough conversation and talk about why we don't think that's the idea that is going to get us to the next level. We have to say no to lots of events. We talked about earlier, it's the most expensive way to raise money. So events should be part of it, but if it's the only way that you're raising money, you're probably leaving cheaper, less exhausting ways of raising money. Another thing we have to say no to, we have to say no to the way we've always done it. Well, we always do this. We always do that. You know, sometimes that well-meaning board member is actually trying to point out to us there are other ways to do it and we should try them, right? That's one of the things. We have to say no to the myth that if we just work harder, we'll get more money. I think if most of the nonprofit sector, if they work any harder, they're going to just fall over. I have worked with so many nonprofit people who just like wouldn't buy themselves a pair of jeans or never make it home for dinner or work every single weekend or whatever that thing is, don't take vacation, whatever it is. If working harder just got us more dollars, we'd already have them, right? It would already all be fine. We have to say no. This one was really hard to me at my first nonprofit job, which was a homeless shelter, that if we don't work that extra hour or that extra day, that one other homeless person won't get fed or that pelican won't get saved or that child won't succeed academically. But it's really a scarcity mindset that keeps us trapped, and it's often not supported by the data. So I'm just going to stop there to see if anyone has reflections on things that we have to say no to in order to focus.
I put it in the chat, but saying no helps prevent mission drift, and maybe your mission needs to be reexamined. I feel that this has brought that to light for my nonprofit for sure. But I have been involved in other nonprofits when you get all of those outside influences that aren't really related to your mission.
That's such a great one, mission drift, absolutely, right? Sometimes it makes sense to take another program into your organization, expand the way that you're supporting a certain population. Maybe you're going to wrap around that. And maybe you know that just focusing on academics, for instance, is the way to go, or only focusing on a particular population around academics or whatever that is, or a school. That's going to be the thing that allows you to be successful. And then maybe once you've reached that, then you can expand. But sometimes we're just expanding. We don't even know why. So why do we have to say no? We have to say no so that we can say yes to something that works. So we can say yes to analyzing our actions and see if what we're doing is worth the effort. So in that previous scenario I talked about where I was just working, I'm pretty analytical. I love doing my data analyses. So I did do them, but taking the time to do that, and once you get to that part and realizing something and just letting it go, saying, okay, we will find that $2,000 a different, easier way. Maybe then it'll be 10,000 or 20,000 because I won't be killing myself for two. We want to say no so that we can strategically try new things. So whether last year you just tried a bunch of things because we were in the pandemic, or you tried a few things, saw if they worked, analyzed them, kept them, dropped them. Either way, that's the way we can do things this year, is we can strategically try new things. Okay, so I promised that we would go back to the data that we wrote down. So I want you to go and look at your past data. And the last question I have in here is, what if I'm new and I don't have any past data? So I've been asking everyone to go look at their past data. So I will address that. If you're in that situation, then what I want you to do is kind of just keep focusing on this upcoming year. I want you to write down a couple of fundraising activities that you want to do and start making your goals for yourselves. We're going to address it more, but let's keep going. Let's keep going. Hi, can you guys close the door? On using our past data. So if we're looking at our 2019 and our 2020 data, what I am suggesting in focus that I have seen physically work at nonprofits is pick one goal area to increase this year. Just pick one area. It could be individuals, it could be foundations, it could be government, it could be events, it could be whatever it is. I want you to pick one area right now, and I want you to list 1 to 3 things that you can do this year to increase that area. Okay, and give me a thumbs up if you've completed that. All right, we've got some people completing. So I'm going to kind of move to the next part. Now, I earlier on asked you to look at your 2019 and your 2020 data. And what I would like you to do is anything outside of the focus area that you've chosen just now, I want you to make your goal to maintain dollars. Now, maintain in this environment, first off, is a victory, but also is a little bit odd to even figure out what that means. So we're looking at not losing but not focusing on gaining, okay? Because we had an unusual 2020, maintain might look like restoring 2019 dollars in some cases. So you might look at something and say, we didn't get something last in 2019 or we didn't get something last year in 2020 because of the pandemic, and we think we could get at least part of that back. So you might be able to be putting some dollars back. That's still, I would call, part of maintaining. What I don't want is any gargantuan new activities that you have to do to make those dollars be what they are. So you're going to do whatever you do. If you write 40 grants in a year, write 40 grants in a year. If you write 2, write your 2. If it's you always do a certain kind of event, do that certain kind of event. Whatever that thing is that you're not focused on growing, you're just going to do what you always do, okay? You know, maybe there's a little increase in there. Maybe you're like, oh, maybe we'll get a couple more donors from that. But basically keeping it about steady. Look at what seems reasonable, okay? So if you're looking at 2019 and 2020, it might look like kind of splitting the difference a little bit. It might say, okay, I know some of this can come back from 2019, or I know this was already the same last year, and so we're going to keep those. So that's why I asked you to look at both 2019 and 2020 so you can see, is there anything that's kind of be coming back will be part of your maintenance. Okay. The key there, though, is to not get ambitious about the non-focused areas. Again, I've witnessed organizations that when everything is focused on growth, literally the end of the year, nothing has grown at all. And sometimes some things have gone down because human beings, I think, are just not really able to focus in all those ways. I'm going to stop here for questions or thoughts before I get to some chat questions. Anyone have any questions they have from the exercise we're doing? Okay, so I'm going to look at the chat here a little bit because there's some really great questions in here. I'll try to answer them as I can. So the first question here from Heather. So beyond thanking actual donors, how do we keep up the momentum from Giving Tuesday and end of year in trying to attract more donors? Well, one of the things, again, like looking at the last year, anything that you did that worked, you want to keep that in there. The other thing we want to look at is if we think of fundraising as a well, and if we look at when we fundraise, we're drawing from the well, then what we want to be doing in parts of the year when we're not actually asking, we want to be filling that well. So how do we fill that well with our donors? We can be communicating, we can be sharing impact. There's all kinds of things that we can be doing there, but we want to make sure that we're keeping up. Communication is a really big one. And we are going to be asking again. One of the things, asking on the sooner side is actually, again, one of the ways that we can keep up that momentum. Any simple ways to try and fill the unmet end of year fundraising goal? So depending on how far it is, you could just choose to do yet another campaign. We're in a new year, you can start something new. I have clients who keep their end of year fundraising up through January and sometimes even a little bit longer. You can start a new campaign either for individuals or some other thing. We're in a new year, so I would say we can just try some new things.
And when you say you've had some clients keep up their end of year kind of through the end of January, what does that look like?
It would look like, rather than sending out those communications that are like, oh, thank you so much, we raised this much, we got this many donors, this is what we'll do with it. There's maybe still sending some appeals that are out. That one of the things that I had read was that in January, in the holidays, people are focused on other people. They're either focused on other nonprofits, they're focused on their family. In January, people start turning to focus back on themselves, their own goals. And if you can frame yourself as part of their own goals and their personal, like their pet charities, then you can kind of dive into that messaging and be part of their New Year's goals. Does that answer your question?
Sorry, I was taking notes. Yes, it does. That's why I put the clappy hands up there. I was writing.
Oh, yes. I didn't see it. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Do you let donors know that you didn't meet your year-end goal? So this is trickier than I feel like it should be. There isn't a right answer. So I'm going to give you a couple answers with that. So if you're going to be like 100% transparent organization, and that's like one of the values you're really living into, then I would say the answer is yes. You say, we said we wanted to raise this. This is what we actually raised. Thank you so much to everybody who participated, and you might get some extra dollars from that. Some organizations really don't like to share if there's a gap between their goal and what came in which case you can just share, this is how much we raised, these are the number of donors, thank you so much. Either one is fine. I think you really want to say, like, what kind of organization are we creating ourselves to be? What are we trying to do? But I think getting into the next question, there's a little bit more to this. So how to best communicate our honest financial need without sounding like a sinking ship. So the key is you want to be, so I'm imagining here we're communicating around like difficult financial circumstances, is you want to communicate the actual financial need while also communicating the plans you have for it, the partners you have coming in, and what is happening. So when it looks like, yes, we have a real need, and yes, we have a real plan and real dollars coming in, donors are willing to help. When it sounds like you have a need that's so much bigger than could ever be filled, you don't have the donors, you don't have a plan, they start to say to themselves, why would I send you $100 when you need so much more money that I could possibly fill? And it just feels like I could send that $100 to a better organization. So that's where the line is. You want to find that sweet spot. All right, do we let donors, potential donors know about CARES government assistance? I think there's no problem with that. I'm not sure what the reason would be for not sharing it. But I think, again, like, transparency is a good thing to be living into. All right,
The reason I asked that last question, do we let potential donors know about the CARES government assistance and grants in general, is I don't also want to create a situation where they'll say, oh my gosh, the Heritage Center looks great because look at this. They got a PPP loan, they got some CARES grants from Florida Humanities, they got their usual grant. They must be doing well. I mean, there's a fine balance between, yeah, we got some extra funds that would not normally even have been available to us, but that still does not offset our decreased revenue.
Right. So, and maybe that's the messaging that you have is like, so if you're looking at like you have a real financial need, it hasn't been met yet, and you have all these other dollars and plans and things have happened, you look like a versatile, pivoting organization that's responding to the challenge that's been given to you. You're not a sinking ship. You do have dollars. You are successful, and you are not also where you want to be. So I think that's like a perfect message for sharing. And the other thing is that success breeds success. So, you'll often see nonprofits, if they get a very large grant from somewhere, they'll share, oh, Amazon just, funded your organization for 5 years. That does not stop people from donating. It really makes people come in and be like, oh, I want to join the board, or I want to match part of that or something. So you don't need to worry about that part. Any new fundraising trends for 2021 as a result of the incredibly strange 2020? I think the biggest trends we see coming up is one, the need and emphasis for communication has not gone down. Many of our nonprofits who successfully jumped and responded to the situation increase their communication and will, I think, likely be required to keep that up through the next year. And we may need to look at what kind of staffing and volunteer staffing is required to keep that up, but increased communication is one of them. I think I've seen organizations feel that some of the things they tried were successful, like trying hybrid events or virtual events or online auctions, were all things that some people were like, yeah, this was great. Maybe not for every event, but one of them could be that, or we could do it in conjunction with a live event, and we can include people around the country instead of just in our area. So I think that's one of the things for sure that we've seen they'll stay at least through this year. And there was one other thing. And I've heard organizations say, wow, we were doing too many events before. It's just too costly in time and money, and not we're getting rid of them, but we need to be further developing our other fundraising. Okay. All right. So lots of chat questions there. Thank you, all of you, for your fantastic participation in those. Let's get to our next question here. What if I'm new and I don't have any past data? So does anybody find themselves in that situation? They don't have 2 years to be drawing upon in data. Maybe they have half a year or something like that. No? Okay. So we're going to talk about what that would be like. So obviously goals are easier if you have past data. And if you are not in this situation, don't tune out, because every time you're taking on a new initiative, you are in this same exact boat, right? Like you don't have data, right? But the strategies are the same. So if you don't have past data to use as a basis, you're still going to want to use the focus method. So you're still going to want to pick that one area to focus on. So what that might mean is, let's say if you were a completely new organization, it might mean you're just going to focus on one particular fundraising revenue stream for the whole year. Now, you might try several different things within that stream for the year, but you can do that. You can also make sure that you're strategically trying other fundraising efforts, but they should each be well planned out and analyzed afterwards. So again, if you're new, you're not sure yet what is working. You might have picked an area to focus on, like maybe individuals, but then someone comes to you and they're like, oh, I've got this great opportunity. You're like, great, we're going to try it, right? So you're going to keep trying things, but again, you want to make sure that you are analyzing that and you've got a good plan and you're looking at it afterwards. Just in general, new organizations often have the best luck with events, which is why so many nonprofits get addicted to events, and individuals. So it's one of the ways that until anybody even knows who we are, we end up throwing these events and these parties, whether they're online or in person. We're asking our friends and our friends' friends to be part of it. And that's how new nonprofits often start. As the organization professionalizes, you're going to get more attractive to foundations. And so then as you mature, your organization will then be like events and foundations. So again, as you move through the organizational phases, you're going to want to start weaning off so many events, and but keeping events as one of many strategies. And yeah, those are the main things that I wanted to cover there. So let's look for a second at resources. So afterwards, we always have resources. And someone pointed out to me, I never actually put down what I do and what our resources are for people. So I'm doing that here, which is we have coaching packages. That's one of the easiest and fastest ways to get in and get more of this kind of specific training to your organization, more in-depth and more hands-on. 15 hours for the year, 20 hours for the year. It's a way that you still get to execute your own fundraising, but you're getting more of the guidance that you need. We now have an online grant writing course right on the website created by Barry Benson, which is fabulous. I actually am working with somebody who does virtual events management around the country. He's fabulous and he's fun. So yeah, he's really great. Creating a major gift program, board trainings and retreats. So maybe you know what to do, but you need your board to get in line with it. Grant writing services, marketing services. And then one of the things we are starting this year, I'm so excited, is that as one of these webinars we're going to do about quarterly to start, we're just going to do an executive director support session. These will not be recorded and put online. Executive directors and other organizational leaders can come together. They can talk, complain, get some support, help each other, give each other ideas. So that's something we're starting this year. And past webinars are on the website, thenonprofitcoach.guru, and they're also on YouTube under my name. So those are all things, some of those are free, some of those are paid, but they're all resources that are out there. And this is my contact information. So I'm going to stop there and ask if anybody has last questions or comments before we finish for the day.
I just put this in the chat. Is there a new strategy for approaching foundations this year based on last year?
Whew, that is a really good question. Well, all right, so I'm in the Chicago market, and what I understand about the Chicago market, I didn't even know until recently this was a Chicago thing. I thought this was just how foundations were, is that organizations in the past were very, very strict. And they were looking for ways to kind of get rid of you, not because they're mean, just because it's a competitive market. And so we were often in situations where there was only one way to do it. There was only one program they could fund or certain types. And so things were very structured. What happened last year is organizations, I think intelligently, foundations got more flexible. And they said, okay, we're going to repool our funds. We're going to close down these programs temporarily. We're going to keep this open. So what I think will be interesting going into this year is to see how much of that remains, like funds specifically dedicated towards the pandemic or certain things, and how much of getting back to structure and really formal giving processes are going to become the norm. So that's something to look for in 2021. Awesome. Any other questions?
No, but I just have a comment for the group. Obviously, Elizabeth, we've all shared some time together, but I'd just like to highly recommend the coaching, the hourly coaching. We brought Elizabeth in for a board I'm on, Cinema Chicago, and she's just done tremendous work. We've already re-engaged her for additional time. It's been truly invaluable information and new dollars to the organization. So kudos, thank you. Always love the free seminars as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And with that, we're going to end.